Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today is no exception. We have a great guest all the way from Toronto, Canada. Welcome to the show, Quentin DeSouza.
Hi, Victor. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here again. Now, Quentin, you and I have known each other for a number of years and developed a bit of a friendship. And boy, so much has changed. I thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about a segment of real estate investing that is maybe not quite mainstream. But before we do, maybe give a little bit of your backstory and how you got to this point in your journey.
Sure. I started investing in 2004, 2008. I started to do BRRRR projects and with single families, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. 2015, I started to move to apartment buildings. I've been a full-time investor since 2013. I've written 6 books on Amazon, and I run a real estate club in the Durham region, just east of Toronto, Canada.
That's awesome. Now, when we talk about, you've built a fairly sizable portfolio. When we talk about acquiring that portfolio over time, you've stayed away from those smaller properties and you've really graduated into larger properties now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. I'm focused on buildings between 10 and 100 units. And, I do have some smaller buildings that I bought initially in 2015 and 16, and 17. But I really focus on the, I would say smaller, medium buildings. I guess it's all in perspective, but and you've got to remember that what's really different is I am in a rent-controlled market. So when I say rent control, that means that the government basically dictates every year what we can do as an annual increase. There is rent that is decontrolled between units. So if a tenant gives a notice to leave and you're putting in a new tenant, you can bring that tenant up to market rent. And, there are some other things like you can do an above the guideline increase, and there are, some things that can be done. But our market in Ontario, Canada is very different than most. So what I'm focused on when we're looking at apartment buildings, we're looking at net operating income. And, when we're looking at the 1 to 4 units, we're basing our value on the comparative model. And then in the apartment buildings, it's on the income model. So when I can increase the income of a building, I can increase the net operating income, and therefore I can increase the value of the building. So if I take a unit or a number of units that I can turn over in a building, I can therefore increase the value without having to do as many renovations or adding amenities or features in order to give the building additional value. Oftentimes I find that we can boost the value of a building significantly by turning over 25 to 30% of the building and therefore increasing the value of the building, and not necessarily doing anything extraordinary when it comes to finishes. We don't do condo quality finishes in any of our units. We're targeting, lower middle class, blue collar, for our tenant profile. And it seems to have served us well over the last 8 years.
Now, when you talked a moment ago about the distinction between residential underwriting versus commercial underwriting, I know, for example, when we first went into Philadelphia, we started out with a number of smaller properties, but on stabilization, we packaged them together and put a blanket loan over the entire portfolio. So it actually got commercial treatment rather than residential treatment. Is that something you've looked at, something you've considered?
I have done that. I've done blankets over some of my residential properties, but from a financing perspective, they're still financing it based on debt coverage ratio, and the rents just don't make sense in my smaller, like 1 to 4 unit properties when I've done a blanket commercial. In the 5+ unit space, that can work quite well, just because we have financing that's very different than that's what's available in the U.S. So we have CMHC, which is really kind of like the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or Premier kind of.
It's actually more like HUD financing.
HUD, yes, HUD
Yeah,
financing,
yeah.
exactly. And we're getting 35-year amortizations, 40-year amortizations on our buildings. Where I'm just working on one right now where we have a 4.6% uh, interest rate for a 5-year term. So that's quite good when you're talking about that, and add up maybe 85% LTV with as long as the debt coverage ratio supports it, it becomes quite nice from a financing perspective. Although we just got a news that we're going to see a bump up in June on the rates.
Now, so when you're talking about repositioning, you're not doing a heavy lift on these buildings. These are presumably not amenitized buildings, so you're not
Yep.
really moving them up market. You're simply juicing the rents to the extent that you can within the rules as they're written.
Right, and that's really, like, it's a neat little niche, because what ends up happening is you are always going to go through this process every few years, because the rents will never keep up, based on the actual market rent versus the annual increase that you're allowed. So you can use this strategy to increase the rents, bring up the market rent, but because you're in a rent controlled environment, you could do this for 3 to 5 years, get to the same point 3 to 5 years from now, and have the same, strategy going forward for the next 3 to 5 years, because your rents have not caught up. I mean, it is a challenging market, when it comes to the residential tenancies and all of that. But I found that this has been a really effective strategy for what I've been able to do on my buildings. Usually every 3 to 5 years, we're working to refinance them and pull out equity, and then put that equity back to work in another building.
Now, you talked about a fairly high level of tenant turnover in a short period of time. One of the hallmarks of a rent controlled environment is that often people refuse to move. They are there for often much longer than they would even expect to be themselves. What can you do that is both legal and respectful that creates that higher turnover?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I have to say that is a problem with this type of environment is that it only is beneficial. Like, a rent controlled environment is only beneficial to those tenants that are already in place. It does a lot of harm to future tenants or tenants that are looking for properties, unfortunately. And I just don't think it's a well positioned system, even though I'm looking at it as an opportunity instead of a problem. So that being said, we're vertically integrated. So we have about 1,100 units that are in our. I have a partner who has a property management company, and so that vertical integration allows us to handle the property management internally. And so we're very geared towards, once we take over a building, ensuring that we are up to that all our tenants are up to the standards of paying rent on time, noise, garbage, all of those things, working within the landlord tenant board, and really cleaning up the buildings that we take over. That in itself, sometimes when we just buy a building, we end up with turnover because there's the new landlord coming in, and that sometimes that's been as high as 15%, but usually it's in the order of about 10% just from purchasing a building. And then once we're in there, we push the turnover of the units by ensuring that people are following, because we're buying buildings from usually landlords or owners who've owned it for 20 or 30 years. They're older couples, and they haven't really followed the landlord tenant board rules. A lot of people paying rent late, different things like that. And we're pushing the screws on and tightening it and, running a tighter ship. So that causes some turnover. Then there's a couple of different things. One, there is the ability to do cash for keys. Although, when I talk to some of my friends in different markets, they can't believe that I would pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to a tenant to leave a unit, but I have. And oftentimes, and actually I just did this recently, where a tenant was at about $800 $850 per month, and the market rent is $1,600 per month, and I paid them $5,000 to leave, and they were able to take that the $5,000 plus. They were getting a supplement from the government for their residential housing, which actually increased when they moved to a new unit. So, they didn't really change their position, and they ended up with $5,000, and we ended up ending that tenancy, turning over the unit. Unit cost was about $10,000 to turn over the unit. Actually, it was maybe closer to 11. And then we have this now increase in rent, and we also were charging additional utility. So let's say we're about $900 more in additional rent in a 4.25 cap market.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and so like when we do something like that, so we're 900 times 12 divided by the cap rate. We're boosting the value of the building by $250,000. So would I pay $5,000? Yes. Right now, as rents become so different between market rent and current rent, it becomes more and more challenging to offer $5,000 to a tenant to turn over the unit. So it may require higher amounts to do the same thing.
Very interesting. So would you say that the strategy you're employing here is unique to the market conditions here in Ontario, or is this something that could be applied elsewhere in places that do have rent control, thinking California, Oregon, other places like that?
Yeah, I believe it can, as long as they have rent decontrol in between the units. Definitely, this is a strategy that can work. If there is no rent decontrol in between the units, then that would be a problem. But I mean, those markets in itself are self-destructing, I would think. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, but yes, definitely, it's an opportunity for them to, that's the way that I look at things. Try to find the opportunity and the obstacle, and that whole Ryan Holiday book, "The Obstacle Is a Way," is a great way to interpret what I'm doing in this market and what other people are doing in this market as well.
I love it. Well, Quentin, if folks want to connect, if they want to learn more, what's the best way?
You can connect with me at quentindesouza.com, or you can pick up a book or listen to me online. There's lots of ways to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Well, love the perspective, love what you're doing, and for the listeners at home, definitely connect with Quentin DeSouza at quentindesouza.com. The link will be in the show notes. And in the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.